and I know what it means to walk along the lonely street of dreams without my co-hosts Chris Battistell and Drew Scott. But thankfully, we got special guest co-host Chris Burns, the Dynasty Deviant, in the house tonight as we welcome in RotoWire's very own Jim Coventry to talk sleepers and fades in redraft for the 2024 season. We are Fourth and Frames, and let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
To all of our guests that are here tonight, we thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us live on that YouTube stream. We were streaming on Twitter, but now we're doing it on YouTube only. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, go ahead and drop it in the comments. We'll get to that tonight. But to make it clear, we have our guest of the hour tonight from RotoWire and SiriusXM Fantasy, the FSWA Writer of the Year finalist in 2022, a fantasy football aficionado since 1994, a DFS guru, and from what I understand, someone who might be able to bridge the gap between me and Chris Burns as we have our little quarrels tonight. Mr. Jim Coventry, how the heck are you tonight, man?
I'm doing well, and I'm ready to do my Ed Hockley here to make sure I get the gun show going and make sure if you guys are fighting, I can kind of get the headlocks on and we'll get rolling here.
Look, man, I see the guns coming out tonight. Look, that shirt's feeling a little snug. You might have done some curls beforehand. Looking great, man. So, Chris, just getting off of 365. How the heck are you tonight, bud?
I'm good. I have no complaints. I'm feeling good, like I should. And I'm here in the house. I'm glad Jim's here, legend. I greatly appreciate him. And, the only way that I would come on and be a co-host with you, Rhett, is if Jim was here. So, I mean, so I'm glad that he's here.
Look, the gloves are off already and it's fine. I just want you to know, Chris, I would not wish anything terrible on you in the presence of Jim, not even medium rare chicken. I wouldn't do that to you tonight in this presence in front of these people. But look, when we go ahead and get into this, let's get into some news and notes around the league. And let's start off with what is easily the biggest fantasy football story of the week so far. A big time Fourth and Frame shout last year. We were all in on the idea of a Nico Collins breakout season. Then things come into question this offseason. They acquire Stephon Diggs. Well, the Houston Texans made it very clear where they stood in signing Nico Collins through a 3-year, $72 million extension. That's M's, ladies and gentlemen. So my man is getting banked. So I want to go ahead and start with Jim and then move over to you. Jim, now in that Houston Texans receiver room, who is the guy to own, whether it be in redraft or dynasty? Is it Nico? Is it Diggs? Is it Tank Dell? Who's your guy right now?
Even before the contract news, I was stunned that the fantasy community had Stephon Diggs in redraft ahead of Nico Collins. Logic should have always won the day. Think about it. Nico Collins, you're in that Bobby Slowick 49er style offense. You need people running crossers at all levels of the field. Nico Collins is not just big, but he is very, very fine-tuned at running those routes and yards after the catch. There is no world ever where Collins for 1 year, Diggs is here. Guess what? We're going to move you to the number 2 for 1 year. Diggs' contract's up, and you get your job back next year. That had no logical sense to it. Collins was always the ex-alpha receiver in this offense. It was never going to change. Now I'm going to lose out on the ADP savings I was getting for the last month and a half because Collins had dropped to wide receiver 21, and I didn't want to push him lower than the 13 I had him at. I wanted him higher, but I knew I could get him. Now people are going to realize, Collins is the guy because they couldn't logically figure that out. So now ADP is going to acclimate back and you're going to have to pay for Collins. And that goes long-term, obviously, as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that because Nico Collins, just the year he had last year, I mean, just so hyper efficient. Even when there were guys out, he was getting deep. His ADOT was through the roof last year, and it was just an unbelievable breakout season for him. So, Burns, I want to go ahead and ask you this question. With the Nico Collins contract news, rank those Houston Texan pass catchers right now in that wide receiver room. Who's your 1? Who's your 2? Who's your 3 for fantasy purposes?
Okay. For me right now, I'm going to be like everything that Jim has just said about Nico Collins. I mean, he said it eloquently, excellently, and there's really nothing I can add to it. The main point that I was going to say was that Nico Collins, like in that offense, like he runs at every level. He does a lot more than Stephon Diggs is going to do. His route tree is just more expansive in that Slowick offense. So he's my 1 still. Stephon Diggs is going to be the 2, and that's only because I think that Tank Dell, he's going to miss part of the season still coming back from that leg or just be slow getting up to speed. I think a lot of the stuff that's going on right now is that just name recognition. Everybody hears the name Stephon Diggs and they think, oh, he's got to be this, he's got to be that, and a lot of it was just from that first season in Buffalo. He did what he did in Minnesota, but in Buffalo that first season, he went off. But then when he started like disingratiating himself with Buffalo and Allen and everybody, pouting on the sideline and just being like the angry man. Like he's going now to Houston where this is a young up and coming team. And now they don't have that old guard mentality of you just go out there, and you just play and you mean mug the whole time and all stuff. Those guys are out there trying to have fun. They're playing. It's a vibe for them and they're just enjoying themselves. And he's going to find himself on an island like he was in Buffalo on the sideline with nobody talking to him and nobody really giving a damn what he has to say. He can throw his hissy fit. They're not going to care. So unless he gets on board, then he's just going to be the odd man out. But right now, I'm going to take him over top of Tank Dell right now because of the injury he's coming back from. And I think he'll be over in the the Y. And he'll be able to move around and do some things there. But for me, it's going to be Nico, it's going to be Diggs, and then it's going to be Dell.
And I think I mostly agree with you, except for one thing, is like we're playing a 14, 15-week fantasy football season. And at the end of the day, I've said this. I saw Tank Dell live a couple years ago covering the Independence Bowl whenever Louisiana was playing Houston. I mean, he was far and away just the best player on that field. Like the stats didn't show it that day, but the way he was able to separate, just the things he could do, the route running, just an unbelievable player. So the way I see it is this: you've got Nico Collins, like y'all said, he's going to be running crossers, spreading things all over the field. Stephon Diggs maybe stretching the field a little bit. There are going to be some underneath targets to be had, and Tank Dell in that slot is going to absolutely thrive. So yes, I agree. After this contract news, for one thing, give me Nico 1. We're across the board consensus on that. Give me Tank as my 2, and then Diggs number 3 by the end of the year. All things considered, at the end of the day, Joe Mixon's also going to get some looks. And I've said it since the beginning of the offseason, since Diggs got acquired. Poor Dalton Schultz, man. He coming off of a solid season, and now he's the 5th option in that offense, and he is actually a pretty good tight end. So not great for him, but you know what? That Texans offense should still be fantastic. So speaking of offenses that should be fantastic, Cincinnati Bengals OTAs are going on, and what do you know? There is no Stephon Diggs, no Jamar Chase, nor is there a T. Higgins in that room. So guys, let's just ask the question. Chris, is this a big deal? Is this not a big deal? Are they posturing for contracts? Is Higgins trying to get traded? What do you think is really going on here right now? Chris?
Yeah, I'll go. I was going to let Jim go first, but yeah, I'll go. Right. I don't feel too much of anything about them not being at OTAs. So first of all, with Higgins, I didn't expect him to be there anyway because he was not happy about the whole tender. I don't think he signed it yet, and he really wants to exit Cincinnati. He sees that the writing's on the wall, and he's probably going to end up being the odd man out. And with Chase, when you've been in the league for a little bit, you got that veteran presence or whatever, you don't want to do any of the off-season stuff. You don't really, want to get in there until, you have to. Like the weather's starting to heat up. He's still, trying to do his whole thing. But as of right now, I don't think it's a big deal. If we get later into the offseason and we see like camp, so once we get to mandatory camp and everything, that's going to tell me a lot more than the OTAs right now. But right now, I don't think it's a big deal. I think both of them will be there. I don't think Higgins is going to be outside of Cincy this year. And I think they'll put on a show this year.
Jim?
So, and agree with everything Chris said. In terms of Jamar Chase, the CBA is too oppressive for him to miss real time. It's $40,000 a day. Now they're doing this hold in thing the last couple of years. That would be during camp. But when the season came around, they're not going to be able to do that. So if Chase decides he didn't want to play, the fines are exorbitant. And on the schedule release night, Adam Schefter was talking about CD Lamb. And the question was asked, well, was Lamb going to be out there? He goes, of course he's going to be out there. He can't afford not to be because of the CBA. Now, like you said with Higgins, different ball game because it's a franchise tag. If he doesn't sign it, you don't get fined for not signing a franchise tag. You just don't play. And it really depends how much Higgins wants to dig his heels in. Clearly, he's angling for the contract. And we saw it last year. Now, Barkley was in that situation. I believe Jacobs was in that situation. And they both got some money, not exactly probably what they wanted, but they got some money to kind of make up and to bring them in. Maybe that's what ends up happening with Higgins. But I agree with Chris. I believe they're both there. But if Higgins really wants to dig in his heels about a long-term deal and doesn't get it, and I don't know economically if the Bengals are going to prioritize that because Burrow gets more expensive every year and Chase is going to have to get paid. So there are business decisions here. As long as Higgins is going to be willing to maybe play on an upped one-year deal, I'm worried about the long-term idea, but I still agree with Chris. I think they're both there.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. But and Chase is one of these situations where we know that everybody is waiting on one shoe to drop right now in terms of wide receiver contracts, and that is Justin Jefferson. When the Jefferson deal drops, and it is going to be a matter of time, then you're going to have Chase follow up and say, I may not be Jefferson, but I still, based off of this offense, I deserve to get paid more than him because of what I mean to this offense. So I think right now where we are, even T. Higgins to this point, everyone's kind of waiting on that Jefferson contract to drop so they can kind of see what their market value is. And every couple of years this happens at a position where the market gets reset. Well, you have a marquee player getting ready to reset the market. And because of that, you're going to see domino after domino after domino ultimately fall. So moving into this last note really quickly, Chris, a little Miami Dolphins news for you that I was going over today. Apparently, 7th-round pick Taj Washington making a little bit of a splash and, quote, helping his case to make the active roster. He's not the story, though. Before we get into our sleepers and fades, I just wanted you guys to quickly cover maybe a couple of bonus sleepers that are going to be a late-round flyer for you guys this year. Jim.
So I'll do one right here. And since we're doing the bonus ones, I won't get like crazy in depth on this one. We'll get on the other ones later. Kendre Miller of the Saints. Here's the point I want to make. Alvin Kamara put up numbers last year, and they were beautiful numbers. He missed 3 games. It was maybe 1,160 yards. He had like 75 catches. I think he had 15 in one game. And fantasy players would be like, oh, man, Kamara's still crushing it. Well, not really. Broken tackle rate down to 15th percentile for Kamara. Yards after contact, only 27th percentile. And even after the catch, 24th percentile. So going into age 29, Kamara is a player in steep decline. Jamal Williams was no longer a factor last year. He fell off the cliff. Well, Kendre Miller didn't play a lot. He missed time with 2 injuries, a hamstring early, and then he had an ankle late in the season, and he missed like 9 games. So all that said, he was on the field some in a super small sample size, but he was 75th percentile broken tackle rate, yards after contact, 80th percentile. And in the 2 games he actually played significantly, New England and Atlanta, the rushing wasn't great against New England, but they were a pretty solid run defense. Chipped in 4 catches, 53 in that game. But against Atlanta, he's about 6 yards a carry. I think the team is going to see Miller, 3rd-round pick last year. They're going to see him as an ascending player. They see Kamara. They know what he was last year, despite the numbers. And I really think that Miller, at the very least, is moving into a timeshare here. And if he plays as well as we think he could and Kamara continues to slide, that could be even more prominent for Miller as the season goes on.
Yeah, love Kendre Miller this season. Burn, do you have a bonus sleeper for us quickly?
I'll throw out a quick one. Antonio Gibson. With the Pats, excuse me. Ramondre Stevenson, yeah, he's there. Like everybody thinks he's the workhorse and all stuff. With the new OC, with Alex Van Pelt coming over, he might try to do a little bit like he did in Cleveland, and you might see like a the two-headed monster, whatever. I think at worst that Gibson will get the receiving work, which just that opportunity alone, I think, is going to make him more fantasy relevant than he was in Washington when he was in Rivera's doghouse for whatever reason. So just quickly, that's my deep sleeper.
And just go ahead and round the frames real quick. Jerry Bagshaw, we appreciate you joining us tonight. He asked us if we could see Chase being the best wide receiver in football this season. Around the frames, Jim, yes or no?
No, he's yet to put up a season that has the floor of Justin Jefferson or even the floor of Tyreek Hill. I mean, could it happen? Yes. Remember this. Since his rookie season, Jamar Chase, I believe, has 150-yard game, and I think that one is it. And the two high shells, yes, he's very productive. He's going to catch a lot of passes, but the league adjustments to him have really worked from that crazy rookie year. And he only had 1450 in that season. So he may get another 1450, but I don't see him as that 1,700-yard guy.
I don't think I've ever heard the phrase casual 1450 in my life until tonight. That's awesome. Chris, can Chase be the best wide receiver in football this year, yes or no?
There's greater than a 0% chance that he can, but I'm not betting that he will. Everything that Jim just said, and plus I think with CeeDee Lamb down in Dallas, we saw what he did in the volume that they produced last year, and I can't see any reason why that would go down. I think it might actually have a slight uptick up, just looking at how Dallas seemingly downgraded everywhere else. So, like, I don't think he's going to do it, but it could happen, but I'm saying no.
Fair enough, guys. So once again, if you guys are streaming, whether it be on X, Facebook, or YouTube, go ahead and drop those comments, drop those questions. We're happy to answer them. But as for right now, let's get into why we're all here talking about sleepers and fades for the 2024 season. And as we always like to do, Jim, there is a certain Atlanta wide receiver that you're really high on for this season. Go ahead and tell us why Darnell Mooney is a guy that you are really into this coming season.
Yes, the fantasy community hates Darnell Mooney. He's going off the board as wide receiver 75. Look, Mooney had a crazy amount of targets in 2021, a few years ago. 140 targets, 1,055 yards. It still was a dysfunctional offense. But what Mooney proved that year, we thought he'd come into the league as a deep threat. He was winning routes at every level of the field. Defenses were making him the player to stop because he was the only receiver they had of note. Now, the last 2 years, look, it wasn't good. Total of less than 950 yards combined over 2 seasons, 120 targets. You can't fault Mooney. Like I said, the offense was still broken. It was never an opportunity for him to see the target volume he needed or deserved. Well, he's going to Atlanta now. And the best thing is Zach Robinson is going to be the offensive coordinator. He brings that Rams mindset. Now, the Rams mindset is, now I don't think we're seeing the 93% three receiver sets that we saw in Los Angeles. But remember, the number 3 is Rondale Moore. Kadero Hodge is the number 4. Mooney is a full-time outside receiver, number 2 in this offense, across from Drake London with Kyle Pitts on the field. So, first of all, there are going to be pass catchers who will require attention. Mooney's a 4-3 guy. And we know that Kirk Cousins is very good at making his receivers relevant. And again, this Zach Robinson offense, remember the Rams style. We see wide receivers in motion, getting advantages, getting passes out of the motion, freed up, in addition to the downfield work that he'll see. Mooney is a perfect fit for this offense. And Kirk Cousins, I'm not worried about the Achilles. Achilles saps explosiveness. Well, Kirk Cousins has been explosive for 6 years? So we don't have to worry about that. He'll be a drop back pocket passer. So no issue there. But realistically, in that offense, and I don't expect Atlanta's defense to be better than league average. So they're going to have to score some points. So I think Mooney, when you're getting him super late in drafts, I think he could be a very good piece to your roster builds.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Darnell Mooney, and like you said, he's had some really good years in Chicago where he was surprisingly effective. I believe a 4th, 5th round guy coming out of Tulane. Just one of these guys that just always used that speed and kind of got open despite the smaller stature. So, Chris, I want to go ahead and bounce that to you about Darnell Mooney in this situation. Jim says he's going off at about wide receiver 75 right now, which is an absolute steal. So let's say everything goes well for Darnell Mooney. What do you think is the ceiling for Darnell Mooney this year in terms of being a wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever that is in fantasy? And what would be the absolute floor for him in your opinion?
All right, so I'll start with the floor. Like the floor is going to be what you saw from him last year. Like really, he can't get any lower than that. The Bears, like I really don't know exactly what's going on there, but I don't think we're going to see that. But that is the absolute worst that can happen. If he goes to Atlanta and all the other skill positions, just take off and he's the odd man left out. So that could happen. But I think that his ceiling. Honestly, I really think that his ceiling could be wide receiver 2, like coming somewhere in the 16, 17 range. So I think that is the higher end of his range of outcomes. If he finishes in that area, then yeah, you've won. From the price that you're getting him right now. And if he gives you that return, then hell yeah, that's a great return on investment. So I'll say low end wide receiver 2, and his floor is whatever he was last year, which was not 0. What you wanted on your teams.
Whatever it was last year, which was not great. So let's just go ahead and ask questions, because I hear 2 people right now being pretty darn high on Darnell Mooney. So all I could take from that is to assume this, and let's just ask the question. In that pecking order, you have all these weapons: Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. Where does Darnell Mooney fall into that? And if he is potentially the 4th option in this offense, what's the path for him to get where he reaches that ceiling, if there even is one?
When we're talking the Rams style offense, Kyle Pitts is going to have his role, but I don't know that role is me more than 100 targets, which is a nice target number. It's a very nice target number, but the Rams offense is largely predicated on the wide receivers. And I believe Zach Robinson brings that over to Atlanta. It's going to be a wide receiver centric offense. And Mooney is going to have to see in the neighborhood of a floor of 80 targets. And Drake London is going to eat. And Drake London's probably going to see 140 plus targets instead of that 115 he was getting. He's going to see real alpha targets here. Now, he doesn't fit the model Drake London of what we see from those Rams receivers like Cooper Kupp, Puka, Nacua, completely different ballgame, but you work with a superstar. You make that work. But Mooney fits the intangibles of that offense. Again, the motions, the plays out of the motion, those things, he's going to be a staple within this offense. So, like I said, I think even if where you're drafting him, if you got flex value out of him, you crushed. You absolutely crushed. If you got him at wide receiver 65 and a flex all day long. And I don't think there's many worlds he's not a flex.
No, I 100% agree with that. And that's a good assessment of it. It was like last year, we were sitting there, and, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but Nico Collins last year was going off somewhere in that wide receiver 50 to 60 range. And I went out there and I said, if he puts up a 700-yard season last year, you've already won based off of where he was going in drafts. It's very much a Darnell Mooney situation this year where based off of he's wide 65, 75, whatever that is, anywhere you get him where he's having startable weeks based off of where he's getting drafted right now, you've already won. So I love that call on your part. Speaking of calls that might be going a little bit underrated right now, Deviant, you have a running back that you're high on. Go ahead and talk about him.
Yeah. So for me, running back Chase Brown from the Cincinnati Bengals. And the reason why I have him on my sleeper list is just pretty much the value that you can get if he hits. So right now he's going as the RB 36 in a PPR, 117th overall, off the board. So that right there is a late 9th round pick. All right. And you're like, all right, so a late 9th round pick, why should I care about him? I'm glad you asked, Rhett. I'll tell you. So right now, the only person in front of him, as a depth chart, these paper depth charts right now, is Zach Moss. Zach Moss is entering his age 27 season. And yes, we saw Zach Moss when Jonathan Taylor was not playing the beginning of last year. He crushed, he was doing the thing. And then everybody thought that when Jonathan Taylor came back that first game that we would never see Zach Moss again. And Zach Moss crushed that game. But slowly after that game, as the season went on, we saw less and less of Zach. And when we did see him, he was not extremely efficient. So he did fade a little bit at the end of that season, and kind of limp to the end of it, right? But now he's in a new place. He's in a high-powered offense. There's all the weapons, so the onus is not on him to carry that whole team. But I'm not sure if we're going to see what we saw at Indy. I'm not expecting it. But even if we do, Brown, he could be that the third down back, catching passes out of it. He showed the ability to catch it. He's also shown the ability that he can be a workhorse. If you look at his last season back in Illinois, like, he carried the ball a ton. Like, he was a workhorse, so he has that big play ability. And that is something that the Browns like covet. They really could use that right now, so you have the playmakers and the wide receivers. If you have a running back that can have some juice and do some things in the back, that's going to be a little more like shake to him than what Mixon had, like Mixon's end of tenure there, then it's going to be great. So that big playability, the fact that he can carry the whole load if Zach Moss does go down. And I'm not ruling out that he beats Zach Moss outright. It would not surprise me at all if he did. So for those reasons, if he does get on the field and he does get to play, then he can give you a very, very decent return. And if you're getting him as a late ninth round pick, everything that Jim just said about Darnell Mooney, if he becomes like flex worthy for you, from where you've gotten him, then you've absolutely smashed. It's a home run. And so those are the type of players that you want to be getting later in the drafts that give you the opportunity to actually win championships because they have a path to opportunity, and it's really not hard to see him getting there.
So yeah, Jim, I want to go ahead and bounce off of that because he mentioned the idea of Chase Brown possibly being a pass catching running back in that offense this year, maybe even being a workhorse sort of guy. So I want to ask you this: in your builds of your teams, how important are those pass catching guys on your bench that can step in and give you weeks for you personally?
Yeah, the pass catching backs, we know the value of those in fantasy. Most of us play in the PPR leagues, and especially those, because they're guaranteed points. If you get 3 catches, but you put up very little yardage, yeah, it may not be a lot of points, but it's something. If you just have an interior grinder, change of pace back, and it goes for 6 carries, 9 yards, you really got nothing out of it. So the pass catching backs later are really important because when you need the fill in, you just need points. And sometimes these pass catching backs, they like Chris is talking about. Well, Chase Brown may walk into more work if he can overtake Zach Moss. And I don't think that's a Herculean challenge either. Coming out of college, Chase Brown is one of my favorite players out. And I thought that he was a player that's going to play way better in the NFL when he fit into a system the way his skill set was. And what we saw in a small sample, yeah, we saw a little bit of that guy. Now, I don't know that they're going to want to give him a full load of carries. And I know I'm getting off the question real quick, but Zach Moss might get some innings eaters touches, as I call them, some. But I agree with Chris. I think Chase Brown offers them a lot more. But to finalize the answer, you said with the pass catching backs late, yes, very valuable in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely on that. And I love what you mentioned about innings eating running backs, because the guy I'm going to talk about right now might be the very definition of an innings eater. And when we're talking about Zamir White out of Las Vegas, I mean, Serge got these draft boards right now based off of the way he finished 2024. He had 4 top 20 finishes in PPR leagues to finish that 2023 season. And if we're looking at their offseason, the biggest offseason ad they had in the running back room was what? Dylan Labe, who is a 6th-round pass catching guy. So if we're looking at Zamir White and who he is, yes, for one thing, we're not expecting him to catch a ton of passes. That's not who he is. But when you look at him and what he did over those last 4 games, there were 17 carries or more in each of those last 4 games. And is actually a guy that if you go on these betting websites right now, be it DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever it is, Zamir White is kind of a trendy guy right now to win the rushing title because his odds are somewhere like over plus 3,000. And people are expecting this massive workload off of him right now. So currently going in the Fantasy Pros ECR as running back 24. And like we said, there was a lot of work toward the end of last season where he had a 70% snap share in 3 of those last 4 games. and near 60% the other ones. Okay, Rhett, this is fine. This is great. But what does that actually mean in terms of efficiency? Well, he ended the season averaging 4.3 yards per carry, 4.6 yards per carry against stack fronts, 4.6 against base fronts. 66% of the yards he had in 2023. You mentioned the Alvin Kamara thing a while ago after contact. 66% of his yards came after contact last season. And his success rate. Chris, let me just ask you a question right now. If you were to be in a fantasy draft, are you taking Jahmyr Gibbs or Zamir White? There's an obvious answer, right?
Yeah, it is.
Jahmyr Gibbs. If you're looking at success rates, Zamir White in 2023, albeit a small sample size, had a very similar success rate to Jahmyr Gibbs and Achane. He also had a better success rate than Ken Walker, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, and Travis Etienne, all of whom are currently going higher than Zamir White. So yes, we are talking about a 4-game sample size. We can't predict the world off of that. That being said, this is a talented player who has that potential to be a high-end running back 2, or maybe even a low-end running back 1 if the Raiders do have a lot of positive game scripts here in 2024, if they happen to be a good team. So for me, I'm all in on this Zamir White train. I know he's going around pick 85 right now, which would put him roughly at the end of round 7, beginning of round 8. So also still some good value there, but he is trending up. So I guess get him while you can, whether it be drafts or anything like that.
Rhett, can I add something to kind of solidify your cause? I think it's my research turned something, and I was going to go ahead and do it anyway because you're going to tell me yes. So thank you. Sure. So last year, Luke Getsy was the offensive coordinator for the Bears, and I was stunned to find out the Bears were sixth in the league in running back yards per carry at 4.5. That was crazy. I think the Bears backfield did that. Well, what Luke Getsy did was he was running the 5th highest rate of heavy personnel in the league. 39.9% of the time, the Bears had heavy sets, meaning extra tight ends, extra running back on the field, differing sets. They mixed them up. They had like 3 different formations heavy they used. Well, the Raiders had a very good run blocking offensive line, which they'll mostly return. But overall, for the season, the Raiders were not a high performing running team. But what did they do in the offseason? Well, they bring Getsy in. Well, what's the heavy personnel? Well, they bring in Harrison Bryant to go with Michael Mayer, and then they draft Brock Bowers. They have 3 tight ends on that roster now who are all, Harrison Bryant's a blocker, but he's a good blocker. And they got 3 tight ends there. And so Getsy coming over, and Antonio Pierce, we know he wants to play defense, and they have an emerging defense, and they want to run the ball. So I think roster construction, they did Zamir White a lot of favors. I just want to throw that in.
Yeah, and it's a great point because I was getting ready. Once you said the 12 personnel thing, I was going to the Brock Bowers situation, but then you add the Harrison Bryant thing, and this is kind of a double dipper where people are very high on Brock Bowers. But if we're looking at 12 personnel, I've kind of always been in the thought process, just a little aside here, that Brock Bowers could be playing a lot of big slot situations this season. And in signing Harrison Bryant in free agency, now you have the opportunity to play Brock Bowers, save him for that big slot situation, sprinkle in Bryant in that 12 personnel, help out Zamir White, help out Brock Bowers, maybe even help out Devontae Adams a little bit. So a lot of good things going on in that Raiders offense. There's just one giant question we're all asking, and that is about that quarterback and who's going to be playing it on opening day. But speaking of questionable quarterback situations, Jim, you have a wide receiver that you feel can outperform his ADP, and I'm just going to immediately have questions based off of his quarterback situation. But go ahead and give us the tea on Wan'Dale Robinson.
Wan'Dale Robinson is going off the board as wide receiver 85. So if you're in a small league, he's not getting drafted at all, and you're probably not either. But if you're in any type of deep league, wide receiver 85, I have Wan'Dale Robinson at PPR as my wide receiver 63. So it's a borderline wide receiver 5 we're talking, okay? So we're not saying he's going to take the world by storm here. But here's what I want you to know about Wan'Dale Robinson. First of all, he plays in the slot. And he probably will get some outside snaps on occasion, but he'll be a slot receiver. The Giants made improvements on defense. It's not going to be a very good defense. They're going to have to throw. But the slot throws are reliable throws. Remember, the NFL is now 73% zone defense. And that means you get gaps in the zone. You have inside receivers that can work that. That is the trend the NFL has been going. Well, Wan'Dale Robinson had that ACL tear in 2022. He was not, in my mind, fully healthy till the week 13 bye because Wan'Dale Robinson had one 40-yard game in the first 10. Coming out of the bye, he looked like a different player. He had 55 or more yards in 3 of the last 4 games. I believe that was due to the ACL finally recovered, and we don't think much of Daniel Jones as a passer. But again, Robinson was 68th percentile yards after the catch, but that includes the whole season. When he was not himself, he could be 85th, 90th percentile after the catch. And Malik Neighbors is there, and he is going to draw a ton of targets. But again, those slot catches are going to work their way up. And as a wide receiver 5, yeah, you could plug him in on bye weeks, injuries. And let's say they're trailing a lot or they have a bad matchup. Maybe you could pencil him in some game for 5 catches, 56 yards. And that might be a good flex play for you too.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I'm noticing is that you are big on finding these flex guys that are going to help build out a roster. You're a big squad depth guy, and I know that especially in these deeper leagues, whether it be a 12 team, some of us play 14, some of us get crazy and even get into 16 team leagues. These Wan'Dale Robinson types are going to be the guys who make the difference in the margin and end up helping your team out in a big way. So continuing with the theme of apparently New York Giant pass catchers, Chris Burns, little bit of a shocker here. Go ahead and tell us why my perceived Darren Waller replacement is going to be a factor in New York this season.
Well, just rewind the last 2 minutes and everything that Jim just said. I'll give you a little more context. So the person that I'm picking as a deep sleeper is tight end Theo Johnson of your New York Giants. He was just drafted in the 4th round of this last draft, and he is a big athletic freak, 6'6", 246 pounds. He's coming into, and he has like some juice to him, right? So right now he is being drafted as the tight end 40, not 40 overall, the tight end 40, which, okay, I understand. A lot of people don't know who he is yet, but look, we're educating you on who Theo Johnson is right now. And that's 264th overall. So that's what, the 22nd round that he's going off the board.
It's
everything. So he's essentially free. All right. Darren Waller. Everybody wants Darren Waller to be the great thing. And I love Darren Waller. Unfortunately, I don't think Darren Waller is going to play this season. And that's just me, like, from my opinion. I don't think he's going to play. With that being said, if Darren Waller isn't there, Daniel Bellinger right now is the only other tight end of note that's ahead of him, really. And, I mean, Bellinger, he can play. I'm not going to disparage him. He can play, but he's not really scary, and he also has an injury history to himself. Like, he's missed some few games also. All right. The Giants, they're trying to shore up that inept offense from last season. They drafted Neighbors. He's going to be outside doing his thing. Everything that Jim just told you, Wan'Dale in the slot is going to give the matchup issues to people. But then you have this tight end that can actually get up the field. He can body up some guys. He's that big target underneath. He can be exactly what Daniel Jones or whatever quarterback may replace him if he does get hurt again, what they'll need. That big underneath target is just beautiful. And just like I said with earlier about path to opportunity, I really see that there is a path to opportunity. Opportunity leads to production. Production leads to fantasy points. Fantasy points leads to championships. And that is what we are after. So if you can get this guy for free at the end of the draft as, an afterthought that nobody's thinking of, you put him on your roster. Let's say he does make his way, up, and he's actually catching these balls. And you know how tight end goes. If you catch a touchdown, you're going to have a good tight end week. And he really could do that. So because of that, I'm going to take my man Theo Johnson and just reap the rewards of picking somebody in the 22nd round and then him giving me a return on investment where I can actually use him in the season. So that is my guy.
And Chris, I love that call because it brings me back to something several years ago As a New Orleans Saints fan, I could remember there being a time where there was a lot of hype around a really raw, big, athletic tight end by the name of Jimmy Graham that people didn't expect to make much of an impact in year one. And for most of the season, he didn't until that second half of the year where he ended the season with 6 touchdown catches. And then from there, it was wheels up and he had some really phenomenal seasons. That's not me saying at all that Theo Johnson is going to be Jimmy Graham. Do not get me wrong. Do not scratch me. Do not put me on the record saying that, because that would be a hell of a ceiling for him to hit. But I'm just saying is that sometimes you get these late round tight end guys who you can get off of the waiver wire, who show some athletic upside, who have a few games here and there, show those flashes. And then if you're in something like a dynasty league where you can get that guy on your taxi squad, that next year after he's proven himself a little bit, you see an increased role in year 2. And then those next years in those fantasy drafts and redraft leagues, all of a sudden you have a guy that was a waiver wire guy last year might be an 8th to 10 round guy the next year. So really smart, in-depth look on a guy like Theo Johnson. So moving into that, let's go ahead and talk about my second running back. Apparently, I'm just in love with the running back position tonight. And let's talk a little Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. And before we go, and let me just ask Jim this. Heading into 2024, Jim, are you pro or anti Nick Chubb?
Where he is going in drafts, which is about 80 picks in, if we were buying Breece Hall off in week 5 ACL last year and paying 4th or 5th round cost for him, why are we unwilling to pay a 7th round cost on Nick Chubb? I know he's a few years older, but he's not nearly washed up. So I get it. Every injury is different. And I know on TV that one looked pretty bad, but I haven't heard anything in the rehab. And if he misses 4 weeks, even in the pup list. So I'm in on Nick Chubb. I think Nick Chubb's going to be fine, but they did bring in Deontay Foreman as early down insurance. And I know that's not what you want here because you got Jerome Ford. But I think that might be a 4-week insurance policy on Deontay Foreman in case. But I'm buying in on Chubb as ADP because if I have him after 4 weeks, nobody has a bye the first 4 weeks. So if I draft him there, I don't need him to sub in for anybody. So I am drafting Chubb.
All right, I'm going to sell you anyway, even though that's not what I wanted to hear about Jerome Ford and Nick Chubb. Because if you're in on Nick Chubb and you're confident in Nick Chubb, then more power to you, especially at current ADP. I'm just going to say this. Nick Chubb being a guy who is 27, 28, 29 years old, had a huge workload at Georgia, had a huge workload for years in Cleveland. I'm just kind of hesitant overall about that situation itself. But even if Nick Chubb comes back and he is 100%, I'm going to tell you this. I think that Jerome Ford is going to have every opportunity to be the Kareem Hunt of this offense that there was last year. And he's currently going at running back 40 in the Fantasy Bureau's ECR. And that's coming off of a 250 touch season. Now, the argument against him is that he was not super efficient with his running carries. There was 3.9 yards per carry. It was high volume that he got his yards in. I get that. Where he was efficient was in the passing game where he caught 44 passes and 5 touchdowns. All I'm saying is this. We talked about pass catching running backs a little bit earlier. I have a lot of faith that he is going to be the pass catching back in that offense and inherit that Kareem Hunt role because Nick Chubb has never been much of a pass catcher in that situation. And to boot, if you look at Kareem Hunt last season, he had 135 carries last season and he only had 15 catches. So in a scenario where Nick Chubb is healthy from week 1, we only can assume one thing at this point is that Kevin Stefanski has shown precedent in the past that he is going to use 2 running backs, correct? So with a guy like Jerome Ford, who has a healthy pass catching upside, 160 to 190 touches, which is very much within the realm of possibilities for him in 2024, it's more than enough to pay back that running back 40 ADP that he's at right now. I think he's enough of a value, and I think he's cheap enough that he can be a very steady flex play on a weekly basis. And if he hits that upside, he might even be able to return some RB3 value for you by the end of the season. So, yes, I get it. Nick Chubb is a fantastic player. He's been a fantastic player for years. But at the end of the day, with ADP going where it is and in the situation where this is going to be a split backfield with very defined roles, I'm still in on Jerome Ford.
I want to just add one thing. When you mentioned, I just want to clear this up for the audience. When Nick Chubb, he's not been heavily used. He only has 2 seasons with 230 or more carries. Now, those 2 were near 300, but he has a 192, a 190, a 228. So it's, and I just want to bring that to the audience because I think we all do think Nick Chubb has just been the workhorse every year. But you kind of brought it up with Kareem Hunt, that Kareem Hunt did cut into that workload. And I think that's been the beauty with Chubb, that he has very low mileage for a guy going into age 28 season. But I love your call on the pass catching because he did catch 44 passes, Jerome Ford, last year, and they're going to need a pass catching back. So I think it's a good call on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So
we've talked before you go. Before you move on, I just have a quick question for you, though, right?
Sure.
With Ken Dorsey in Cleveland now, are you worried that he's going to bring in like some old running back like Frank Gore? He likes some old running backs.
I'm going to say this. Even if Frank Gore decides to walk in the room and give his old man swag and wear his Cosby sweaters and whatever it is he's going to do, at the end of the day, I'm going to feel confident in the 3 guys that are going to be ahead of him at minimum in that room, whether it's Deontay Foreman, Nick Chubb, or Jerome Ford. I'm going to feel pretty good that either of those 3 guys are going to be able to take some work from Frank Gore. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong in that situation, I deserve to be wrong.
Yeah, how quickly we forget Frank Gore was a walking RB12. That's all he did was give you RB12.
Oh, great player. Great fantasy player for sure. So really quickly, guys, let's go ahead and move into our fades for the 2024 season. And Burns, I don't want you to feel like we're ganging up on you right now, but you keep in mind that you're coming on my show tonight. So therefore, we're going to throw some slangs at you as much as we can. And I even got Jim on the action. He's going to go ahead and start right now and talk some trash on Devon Achane.
Look, we love Achane, right? We love dynamic football players that can create big plays, and we love speed, and Achane has that, and there's no question. We remember weeks 2 through 4 last year. 51 PPR points, 27 and 23. In those 3 games, he had over 500 scrimmage yards and he had 7 touchdowns in a 3-week span. And so what's not to like, right? Well, the durability, he misses 5 to 6 games between week 6 and 12. We have that. And then here is a problem. After he came back, the Dolphins offense had been figured out. And this is the problem. The offense was so good the last 2 years when Mike McDaniel started the season, the league was stealing all his concepts and they were practicing against them because they were using them. And so what happened was the Miami run game also suffered. So Devon Achane in that early season stretch, he was 12 yards per carry. On the season, he was over 7. But in the last 7 games, including that playoff game against the Chiefs, Achane was 4.97 yards per carry. Now that's a great number, but that's not 12 and that's not 7. And he had 1 touchdown in his last 6 games. And remember, Achane's 5'9", 188. They've got Mostert, who they manage very well. They give him just enough carries to go by. They bring in Jaylen Wright. They still have Chris Brooks, who was hurt last year. So in my mind, Achane is going to be a rotational player because they have to keep him fresh and explosive. But all that said, running back 8 off the board, you cannot pay a strong running back 1 price tag for a player with the questions that I outlined.
And it's a fair point. But Chris, I want you to go ahead and retort right now. Go ahead and sick him. Give him everything you have. Show him how angry you are at this call right now, man.
No. So I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but I mean, yeah, these are my boy. And I got my banners right here. I'm a Dolphin fan through and through, but I'm also a realist and I love football and I love real football. So I'm not going to be on the bandwagon. Everything you said is true. Like, you really can't take Achane at that price. Running back 8. I mean, yeah, he's going to be in a committee. Like, McDaniels has shown you that's what he's going to do. Like, and by his size, he's not going to be on the field all the time. Like, so he's only been in the league for a minute and he's been hurt 3 times. You know what I mean? So we can't expect him to play forever. But what I will say about the offense being figured out, I don't know if it's so much as totally that the offense was figured out, but Connor Williams, when he went down, that is when the offense, he was a center for the Miami Dolphins. That is when the offense completely went into the toilet because Liam Eichenberg is slightly better than me. Actually, no, because I can just fall down and I will slow people down more than he will. He was absolutely terrible on that offensive line. And the Super Bowl, I mean, not the Super Bowl, but that playoff game, I remember messaging Rhett on Twitter and telling him, look at the center. Every play before Tua can get the snap, Eichenberg is in his chest. This is how terrible this guy was. He's awful, but I digress. But yeah, no, I'm not going to disparage anything he said. I'm not going to go against anything he said because what he said is true. And me just being an honest angel, I appreciate the truth, Rhett. Now, I know if he was talking about the Saints, you probably have some vitriol and all that crazy stuff to say. But no, we don't do that here in Dolphins country. We're honest.
You know, and as a matter of fact, speaking of people who I might have to spit some vitriol right now, you're coming from one of my boys, Burns. So go ahead and do that. Get it off your chest. Do what you got to do. And then once it's all done, I'm going to come back and bust back on you. All right.
Oh, you can come back and bug back at me. But I mean, like, I'm already letting you know right now you're defeated. So you might as well just move on to your point. The person that I'm fading, you know, is Puka Nacua, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. And I know that is surprising so many people because he is a darling. Everybody loves Puka. Nobody thought he was going to be what he was going to be, even though I did draft him because I was like, you know, who knows? But I didn't expect that either. So don't get me wrong. But all right, so why am I fading Puka? He broke records. He had 105 receptions. He had 1,486 receiving yards. He has 6 touchdowns. You know, he was doing all that. Yeah, that was great. You know what I mean? So I'm going to take it to other sports or whatever, right? How often is a record broken and then it's broken again the next time that player comes out there? Unless you're Sidney McLaughlin in track and field and you're breaking the 400 hurdle record, like every 4 times you're on, like, you know, every time you're on the track for 4 consecutive times, it's not really happening too much, right? So we saw Puka Nacua. He came out, and yes, he was a bona fide stud. I'm not taking that away from him. He was absolutely awesome. The odds of him giving me that exact same return next year, history's telling me that it's probably not going to happen. Right now, he's going as the number 9 overall, like the number 9 player overall off the board. And like what Jim was just saying with Achane, you know, taking him at the RB8, it's a premium price to pay for somebody we've only seen one season. Going into last season, who thought Puka would do what he would do? Who thought that the Rams offense would be any good? Okay. But now we come back this season. How much different is 2024 versus 2023, what we're seeing? Okay, they did a little bit better, but Stafford is a year older. Stafford got beat up really, really bad last year. The last time we saw Stafford in that playoff game, I felt so bad for him. I'm like, he is one of the toughest people that you will ever see soldiering on, but he's beat up. We know that he's not going to play too much longer. Will he make it through this season? I really don't know. Cooper Kupp, did he just have like an injury and had a down season and he becomes the Cooper Kupp that we know? I don't know. It could happen. Will Puka repeat? I don't know. He could. As a matter of fact, I hope he does. But if I'm betting on it, I'm betting that he won't. And because of that, I am not taking him number 9 overall, which means that I won't get him, which means I'm fading him.
And that's a fair point. But I will say this in terms of how the Rams run their offense. You mentioned Matthew Stafford, and yes, he is older. He is getting up there. You have to keep in mind that this offseason, they sneakily signed what's going to be one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league and who should fit in quite nicely when it comes to Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, I'm not saying Jimmy Garoppolo is a world beater, and there will obviously be a drop-off between Matt Stafford, who was a Super Bowl winner, and Jimmy Garoppolo. But all that to say is that with Jimmy Garoppolo, let's just be honest, he is about 2 yards on a Super Bowl pass away from having a completely different legacy going about him right now. Like, He was that close from having a ring.
Right. And I hear what you're saying, but my pushback to that, the reason why he doesn't have a ring is because Kyle wanted him to be the MVP and let him throw it. The reason why they made it to that Super Bowl, he would let him throw it 15 times a game. He had the number 1 running attack in the league, and he got away from that with a 10-point lead in the second half of the Super Bowl. Jimmy lost it. That's why he was that far away. He did it to himself.
No, Kyle lost it with the play calling, but I digress on that anyway. But which is a Kyle Shanahan thing. Shout out Drew Scott for being a San Francisco 49ers hater as a Rams fan. So, you know, we're going to give Drew his flowers tonight. We're going to hate on the Niners where we can. But also, I'm going to have Drew DM you after the show for dogging his boy like that. But
hey, quick, can I do a quick ad on the Jimmy G thing?
Sure.
So the beauty of Matthew Stafford is that he is in a mind meld with Sean McVay and really with his receivers. The ball comes out before the defense sets their choice routes. Like the Cooper Cup Superman season, it was all choice routes. Wherever they both read the leverage of the defense at the same time. The ball was out. The receiver made the move before they even knew the ball was out because, again, they were reading leverage. Jimmy G, if it's very well defined, it's wide open. Even Kittle hates him because the medicine balls he throw and get Kittle hurt and knocked out for 6 games, throwing it behind him. But and what I want to point out for Chris, the reason I'm bringing this up is if you're betting on Nacua, you're betting on a full season of health for Matthew Stafford. And Rhett, I like your points about Jimmy G, but in that offense, Jimmy G he's not going to do a mind melt. He is not going to have that with those receivers. That ball is not coming out before. It's only coming out after. And those receivers are both slow. And they only can win with brains and then winning with the quick area agility off the line. They don't win into the route. The route's already won when the snap is set up. And Nacua, and this is the worst analysis I'll do all year. Nacua was hit and hurt a lot last year. He played through it, but you saw him getting help to the field an awful lot. I'm worried about his style of play, that if he keeps taking all the hits he's taking, that it's going to end up costing him time.
Yeah, fair point as well. And once again, if he happens to get hurt, and we do not try to bake in injuries in our analysis, we want to take the player as it is and where their ceiling might be. But it's a valid point to say that if he does happen to get hurt, you are going to see a completely different offense. And not only will it hurt Puka Nacua, it can hurt Cooper Kupp, it can hurt Kyle Williams, Matt Stafford, just a trickle-down effect all across that offense. So speaking of getting it back from my boy, Drew Scott right now, I'm going to go ahead right now and tell us why we should fade Jaylen Waddle here in the 2024 season. Chris, let's be simple. And let's keep it straightforward. As a Miami Dolphins fan, I think we can both agree with 2 things. Number 1, Mike McDaniel loves running the football. Number 2, Mike McDaniel loves getting the ball to Tyreek Hill. Agreed?
Yes. Both of those are true.
171 targets last year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So since Tyreek Hill has shown up in Miami, Jaylen Waddle has not been that year 1 player that we saw. Now, yes, he did eclipse 1,000 yards last season. Yes, he did have over 70 catches. However, where he's currently going on underdog is at the top of the 3rd round. Now, if you were to tell me catch 1,000-yard receiver is going at the top of the 3rd round of fantasy drafts, top of the 3rd round is where we should see elite fantasy assets going, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think we should consider Jaylen Waddle, who played 14 games last season and was the wide receiver 34 in overall scoring and the wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game, as an elite fantasy asset. And he's currently being drafted as wide receiver 19 right now, which is currently right around that 21 range, very close, but still higher than what he actually performed last year. So if you're going to ask me, the math ain't mathing. Mm-hmm. Like we've said before, Tyreek Hill is going to be that first option. If he's healthy, he's going to have another 160, 170 target season. That running game is going to be a 1B between Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, and maybe even some Jalen Wright sprinkled in there as well. That's going to be your second option because they like running the ball as well, which leaves Jaylen Waddle as your 3rd option in that offense. And a guy who had only 7.4 targets per game and only had a wide receiver 2 finish or better in 6 of his 14 games that he played last season. Should we really be drafting a guy at the top of the 3rd round in drafts purely on upside? Yes or no?
Jaylen Waddle, yes. You should. And this is not a homer pick, but see, because I am a Dolphin fan, and unlike you, I watch every snap that the Miami Dolphins play, I can tell you a little bit of context about Jaylen Waddle. Yes, it was his worst year as a professional. It wasn't because of Tyreek Hill. It was because of injuries. He wasn't healthy the entire season. He was nicked up in OTAs, and he toughed it out, and he was going on the field. There were several games where he's missing 2 or 3 quarters because he's injured, but he gets back in there and he's doing his thing. He missed 4 games. So that's going to take his total down a little bit. And as you said, Tyreek is a target hog, so he's going to get his love. And Mike McDaniels, you're absolutely right. He does love to run the game, but you know what Mike McDaniels doesn't do a lot of time? Run the football. He gets really happy with the forward pass. And even though he does have a running attack, he gets away from it. 3 or 4 of Miami's losses last year were because Mike McDaniel stopped running the ball because he wanted to pass it. You got a prolific passing game. He wants to use it. It's effective. This year, Jaylen Waddle will be healthy. This year, Jaylen Waddle will be a solid wide receiver too. This year, Jaylen Waddle will disparage everything that you just said because last year he was hurt. So even with his down year, Baseman at his worst, he still had his 3rd 1,000-yard season. He still performed what he did. So where he is right now, I still think he's going to outperform that ADP. And that's just because I feel that when you have a healthy Jaylen Waddle on the field, when you have him complementing what Tyreek Hill does, when you have the track speed in the backfield as well, something's going to be left open. And when you're bracket coveraging Tyreek Hill and you're worried about Achane out of the backfield, Jaylen Waddle is going to eat you up in the middle.
Fair enough. And I'm going to tell you what, I appreciate you having the inside of the Miami Dolphins to prove me wrong, because this is why we have the guests that we have on here. This is why we have the guest co-hosts that we have on here, bringing that knowledge, bringing that fire on a weekly basis. And Chris, I heard a little bit of hate coming out of your voice just now, and I thought you just told me that wasn't something we were going to do in this situation. But I want you to know at the end of the day that you're still my brother, and I still forgive you in that situation, man.
Oh,
I got nothing but love.
I love it.
Rhett. Nothing but love for you, Rhett. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do, and I respect you, your opinion. I'm not saying that you're wrong, even though I just said that you're wrong. I am disagreeing with you, though. So you're not necessarily wrong. We just are on the other side right now.
That's it. Sleepers and fades, guys. We're going to talk about it. To recap, Jim Coventry said Darnell Mooney and Wan'Dale Robinson set to outperform and be those flex plays this year. I talked about Zamir White possibly becoming a borderline RB1 and Jerome Ford having some pass catching upside. And Chris Burns came over here and he gave us his takes, which was, if I could pull up the show sheet real quick. This is great radio. Chase Brown possibly being a workhorse running back, and Theo Johnson coming in and showing some year 1 upside. So those are sleepers and fades. And before we go, let's go ahead and do what we normally do. Jim Coventry, the frame is yours. Go ahead and tell us what you have going on inside and outside of fantasy football at this very moment.
So I do work with RotoWire, and we just launched our RotoWire football only YouTube channel. If you could subscribe, it'd be greatly appreciative of that. I'll be doing daily shows when we get into July, doing a couple shows a week, a lot of video shorts. All my work you can always find by hooking me up on the X at Jim Coventry NFL. I'm putting up 2 stat of the days every day. I'm going to cover most relevant players now through the early part of August. I try to give a little context to stats that we didn't necessarily know if we were just kind of following, and I think those have been very helpful. But yeah, check me out on the X, and all the information and all my work is there. I'll be on Sirius XM once we turn the calendar to July. I'll be on Saturdays and Sundays throughout the whole NFL season. And this is a great show. I love Fantasy and Frames. I love Fourth and Frames, and appreciate you having me on.
And we love you, Jim. Thank you for all you do, helping people out in the industry. Years and years of experience, years and years of expertise, years and years of just being a fantastic dude in this space and helping these youngsters out like me, trying to get their legs under themselves. Chris Burns, go ahead and tell us, regrettably, what you got going on right now inside and outside of fantasy football.
Well, I appreciate that. So inside of fantasy football, you can find me on the Dynasty 365 right here on the Fantasy and Frames airwaves. We air right before Fourth and Frames. You can also find me on the fantasyandframes.com website, where you can see some of my articles where I give you dynasty profiles. I give you some redraft targets. And actually, Antonio Gibson, you heard me talk about him, and you heard me talk about Jaylen Waddle. you can actually see those articles where it gives you a little more in-depth reason as to why I think those are some people that you should be targeting this season. Outside of fantasy football, I am just doing a lot of reading, doing a lot of soul searching, trying to be a better person to get along with people like Rhett. And it takes a lot sometimes. No, I'm just joking. But that's what I got going on. And I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for having me on the show tonight.
Absolutely, man. Great job as always, crushing it. And for me, you can find me at Manuel Sports on X. You can find me Wednesday nights right here on a normal Wednesday night, hanging out with Chris and Drew here at Fourth and Frames. Got some redraft stuff coming up soon, some dynasty stuff coming up on the website, updating rankings. As usual, everybody's over there at Fantasy and Frames doing fantastic work, whether it's Jorge with IDP stuff, Nate Markham doing IDP stuff, Tyler Hill heading up the dynasty content. Chris Burns doing superb exemplary work in everything that he does, and just everybody just having a good time with it as well. That's kind of who we are, and that's kind of what we're going to keep doing over here. So if you're a part of our team, thank you. And thank you, Jim, for taking your time with us tonight, man. So that is it, guys. We will see you next week when we talk early fantasy football ranking discrepancies with the boss man, Jorge Edwards. For my man, the Dynasty Deviant, Chris Burns. For our special guest of honor, Jim Coventry. I am Rhett Manuel. Y'all have a good night and be blessed. We out.